Good afternoon, everyone. This is Lisette Partlow. I work at OSSI in the K-12 Systems and Supports Division. Welcome to our webinar on ESSER federal reporting for FY21. I want to just start. Could someone drop in the chat or pop on to say that they can hear me, and just to let me know that the sound and everything is working okay?
Hi, Lisa, it's Stephanie. I can hear you, but I don't see your screen if you haven't started
You
sharing
don't
it.
see my screen. Okay,
There you go.
thank you.
Mhm.
All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining today, giving up what I'm sure is probably your lunch. And we're going to be talking a little bit about what you can expect for ESSER reporting in this upcoming early 2022 for FY21. Just a little bit of background, many of you will already be familiar with. ESSER stands for the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. And there were 3 different recovery pieces of legislation that made their way through Congress and were signed by the president. ESSER 1 CARES, ESSER 2 SARISSA, and ESSER 3 ARP. Each piece of legislation had an ESSER program within it, and that's why we have dubbed them these 3 different names. All told, this funding was $600 million to the District of Columbia, and 90% of that, about $540 million, went straight through to LEAs. And as a condition of receiving this funding, OSSI and LEAs both are required to complete annual reporting to the U.S. Department of Education. And of course, this reporting is providing transparency to the public on this historic investment and important data and information about how the funds were used for things like safe reopening of schools, strategies to address unfinished learning, and programs and personnel to meet the academic, physical, and social and emotional needs of students, which, as I know, what you all have been hard at work on. So this timeline is just a graphic to kind of give you a little bit of an idea of what is coming next. Our overall goal for today is really to help you prepare now so that you're ready to do reporting in an accurate and timely and complete manner when we have all of the information that we need and are ready to go. As you see now in November and December, we're in this organizing and preparing phase. So we've completed the fiscal year 21, closed out, on September 30th. And what you can do now to be prepared for upcoming reporting is really to organize and and be ready to calculate different information about your FY21 spending. And I'll be going into that in a little bit of detail in further slides. But one thing I wanted to emphasize on this slide, so we have this January, February time range where we think you will be requested to submit your data collection to OSSI, but we actually do not have the final reporting form from the U.S. Department of Education quite yet. So they released a second proposed reporting form earlier this month, a couple of weeks ago, and it's out for comment right now. It's actually out for comment until the end of November. So we don't expect that we'll get the final reporting form. I think the earliest would be very early in the new year. So some of this timeline, the reason why you don't see specific dates like a February 10th is a lot of it is still up in flux. But we really wanted to share with you the information that we do have now because we expect that the reporting as compared to last year, as compared to the fiscal year 20 reporting that you did early in 2021, this is going to be a much more involved data collection process as compared to last year. And also, we don't know, since we don't have the final reporting form, we also don't have information about what kind of time lag we'll have between when the Department of Education releases that final form and when it's due. All right, here's a little bit about what we know about upcoming annual reporting. So again, it's going to be about fiscal year 21, particularly fiscal year 21 spending. We do have the proposed data collection form that the Department of Education has put out, and I'm going to give you a lot of detail about what's included in that in later slides in this presentation. And just to reiterate what I said on the last slide, we do think it's going to be a significantly larger data collection than what was required last year. So we really want to emphasize again, it's important to prepare and get your information together now so that it can go smoothly when it comes time for reporting. And I just wanted to note here that the reporting information in this from the proposed data collection form in this presentation, it only applies to ESSER 1, 2, and 3 funds. So if you received ESSER equivalent funds rather than the regular ESSER funds, you're actually going to have a different, quite a bit more streamlined reporting requirements, and you'll receive separate guidance on those requirements in early 2022 when the final reporting form comes out, but the information in these slides will not be relevant to you. So I just want to make sure that everyone knows that so that you are able to take your time back if you're realizing that this presentation is not relevant for your particular LEA. Okay, as I said, our goal here today is really to make sure that you have the information that you need to begin preparing for reporting. And we really see this slide as the most important piece of the presentation here today. I want to really emphasize that gathering and organizing your information, particularly your financial information, your expenditures from FY21, is going to make your submission process much easier once we do have that final data collection form. And there's a little bit of information on this slide about the kinds of ways that we think you'll be asked to analyze and make calculations on your FY21 financial information. So you should have it gathered in such a way that you can look at your spending and code it by activity, and for spending that went to particular schools, know which school it went to and for what program or activity. Those are going to be some of the things that we expect you'll be asked to calculate. So just to give kind of a graphic version of this point, since a visual is always helpful to get something to stick in your mind, if you have your financial information kind of floating around in different places, the best thing that you can be doing now is getting clear and organized records of your FY21 ESSER expenditures so that you can prepare as we await for our final reporting form from the Department of Education, because we expect they're going to ask you to take that expenditure information and organize it in a variety of different ways. Here's a little bit about what you can expect from us at OSSE. And Stephanie, good to hear your voice at the beginning of this webinar. Do you want to give a little bit of information on this slide?
Sure. Hi, my name is Stephanie Davis. I'm the Deputy Chief Information Officer here at the Office of State Superintendent of Education. And just to give you a little highlight on what to expect when it comes to reporting, as Lisette has said, in January, once we finalize the information we need to receive back from you, according to the Department of Ed's request, we will issue out an ESSER data collection template. This is an Excel document that will allow you to send back to us the specific information that we need to receive from you. This means that you have some information in the grant management system already, but there's additional elements that we're seeing that the department may require us to receive from you. And those are the ones that we're going to request that you complete in that template. Once we have a finalized template and are sending that template out to you, we will host additional webinars in early 2022 to provide instructions on how you complete it, as well as submit it back into OSSE's integrated data submission tool. This tool will allow you to upload the Excel document and get real-time validation checks on the data that you're sending back to make sure that you're providing us with the appropriate and allowable values for each collecting element. Once you submitted that data successfully in the integrated data submission tool, you'll then be able to see that submission along with all of the other information that we're going to report out to the Department of Ed in a click application. And it's in this click application where you, the LEA, will need to have your head of school to certify the data that was submitted. Back to you, Lisette.
Thank you, Stephanie. I just want to pause here and make sure that we have just double check and see if we have any questions. I'd also like to encourage folks, if you'd prefer, to just enter them in the chat box you see in GoToWebinar, and I'll be kind of looking over at that as we go through the presentation. Okay, please feel free to jump in with questions in the chat as we move forward. So the next section of the presentation, we are going to be talking a little bit about the details of the types of data requested by the Department of Education. Again, this is all proposed at this point. We don't know exactly what the final reporting form will look like, but we do think that it is likely to have a lot of this information we're about to present to you as to be requested. So four main types of information that the Department of Education is requesting. They want to know about uses of funds. What kinds of programs and activities did you spend ESSER dollars on? They also want to know about hiring and retention data, pretty self-explanatory. So your expenditures related to things like personnel or staff. And then third, other spending and financial data. A big piece of this category is going to be your spending plans for your remaining ESSER dollars. So whatever you haven't yet spent as of the end of FY21. So what you're spending right now as we're moving into FY22 spending, and what you plan to spend with the remaining grant period during the remaining grant period. And then lastly, and probably sort of the most difficult to calculate, there's several equity indicators included in the proposed reporting form, and that they ask questions in this section about things like your per pupil spending on high poverty versus non-high poverty schools within your LEA. I want to note here, I'm going to show you the tables, the way the Department of Education is exactly as they've put them on their proposed reporting form, and kind of go through them with you for some of the most complicated data, the data that I think it's most important to prepare ahead of time to have ready. But this is going to be a lot different than what you'll see when you get the template from OSSE. Like Stephanie said, the template from OSSE is going to be an Excel document, and it's going to have spaces for you to fill in answers to questions that we don't already have at hand at OSSE through EGMS. Okay, starting with this slide, uses of funds by activity. So the Department of Education has a list here of different activities, different spending categories that they want you to tell them. Did you spend ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3 dollars on? So you see here, each grant is separate, and they want the total amount expended on these different activities. I actually only pasted in a partial list of the activities they requested. So this is the category supporting physical health and safety. They also have a category about meeting students' academic and social emotional needs, and a category about operational continuity. And then there's a half dozen options for activities within each of those categories. So this list actually goes A through Y in the full form. Unfortunately, because we had to put up the application in EGMS before we had this final list of activities, it's not even final yet, it may still change. The budget codes that you've been coding your reimbursements in EGMS don't exactly match up with all of the activity codes that the Department of Education is requesting information for. So one of the things OSSE is planning to do, for example, this B on this slide, assistance with meals for students. We do have a category, a budget code that you've been reimbursing against called meals. And since that category matches up um, nearly exactly with the Department of Education's activity code, OSSE can pre-populate that information for you, and you'll be able to see that in the Click app that Stephanie talked about. However, some of these other categories might not match exactly, and so we'll be requesting that information from you. This is another second way that the Department of Education is proposing to request information on your ESSER expenditure. So this is another way of asking, what did you spend money on? This time, instead of telling us for specific activities, they're asking LEAs to report their expenditures by high-level priorities, this list of 4 high-level priorities. And so again, having all of your FY21 expenditures organized in such a way that you can easily categorize them into these 4 different priorities will help you to be ready to answer this question quickly. All right, moving on to our second type of data requested by the Department of Education, again in their proposed form, not final, hiring and retention data. They want to know for each grant, ESSER 1, ESSER 2, they're calling it ARP ESSER, we've often called it ESSER 3. For FY21, what did you spend on staff and benefits using these dollars? And the budget codes that we have in EGMS, we OSSE have in EGMS, match pretty closely or are pretty clear in terms of salaries and benefits. And so we do plan to pre-populate this information for you and have it ready for LEA leaders to verify in the Click app. A third type of data requested by the Department of Education, other spending and financial data. So for this question, they're going to ask, what are you planning to spend your remaining ESSER funds on? And there's a question for ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3. Oops, sorry about that. There's a question for ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3. And this is something that LEAs will likely have to fill out on their own, but you can of course reference the budgets that you've submitted in EGMS with your planned spending there. And last category, the equity indicators. So the Department of Education is really looking to get a sense of what were these funds spent in a way that promoted equity or was equitable. And this is one of the questions that they're asking about this. I'm going to zoom in here a little bit. So they want to know, they're recognizing here in A that a lot of your spending is going to be happening at the district level and going out to schools from there or at the LEA level. And so they want to know, how much of your ESSER funds went out that way. And then they want to know for money that was spent in individual schools, how much of it was spent in different categories of schools. So schools with Title I school-wide programs, Title I targeted programs, etc. This again, it's going to be really helpful if you have your information, your financial information gathered in such a way that you can organize your expenditures that went out to individual schools by school. And OSSE is planning to provide a list for LEAs that need it of the categories that each of your schools within your LEA fall into. This is an additional equity indicator that they're asking for. They're asking for you to provide information about how much of your ESSER dollars were spent in a targeted way to support particular groups of students that have been historically underserved, and how much of it was providing general support to staff and students within the LEA. I want to note here that I mentioned earlier in the presentation that the Department of Education Their proposed data collection form is out for comment right now. OSSE does plan to ask them for some additional clarification on this question so that we can better understand what would qualify as targeted support, and what would be bumped into the category of general support. And a last equity indicator that I wanted to make sure to show you, this overall looks rather complicated, but actually the first column, they are asking, how did you identify which students were most impacted by the pandemic? And each A through H is just a yes or no question. Did you use student demographic data, yes or no? And after you identify the ways that you after you mark the ways that you identified which students were most impacted by the pandemic, they want you to provide a short answer to a question of how you made sure that ESSER funds were allocated to those students most impacted. Okay, I mentioned earlier in the presentation that this particular slide is kind of the crux, the most important slide of the presentation. Once again, we just want to organize that having your financial information organized and gathered together in such a way that you can calculate your FY21 spending by activity, your FY21 spending by school for funds that went directly to individual schools. Again, many of the Department of Education's questions are about spending, so keeping really good records about what kinds of programs and activities you spent funds on and which schools in your LEA received funds will make calculating answers to these questions easy as we move forward. So speaking of moving forward, here's a little bit more about what you can expect in terms of support for this reporting process. One, OSSE, we are also in a preparing and organizing phase right now. We are going to be working as we await the final template to pre-populate as much information as possible for you all and have that system ready so that it can streamline your reporting process. Where a little bit of You Are Here webinars. We had one yesterday and one today to provide you with some detail on what the proposed form looks like. So it's not as much as a surprise. We expect, since this is the second proposed form, probably less changes between now and the final form than between the first and the second. We'll be keeping you updated as we did for this webinar in the K-12 grants newsletter about anything new we learned about the timeline, final reporting requirements, deadlines, etc. And once we have the final reporting form from the U.S. Department of Education, we will be providing you with the template that Stephanie talked about earlier in the presentation that you can fill out to submit data that we don't already have. And at that point, we will also host additional webinars to give you instructions that are specific to the final reporting template in both how to fill it out and how to submit your LEA's data once we get that final form. And we also want to make sure you know that you can now and all the way through the submission of the reporting and really all the way through the duration of the ESSER grant period, you can submit questions to this. We have a specific ESSER help email osse.esser@dc.gov that we monitor and provide answers to folks regularly. And then once we're in the period where you all have your template, the Department of Education has released their final collection form, and you're getting ready to submit the information, we will also host some office hours that will allow you to come in and pop on to a Teams call and ask any questions that have been coming up as you've tried to fill out your form. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to questions, and feel free to drop any questions that you have in the chat on the GoToWebinar.
Hi, Lisette. This is Stephanie.
Yeah.
Marjorie asked a great question in the chat, and I wanted to just share some additional information. She said that how do we get click credentials? And so my response was to her was to make sure that your LEA data manager updates your role in eSchool Plus. And of course, we're going to provide more information about this in the webinars in 2022. However, one role, if you're wanting to get that work done now, is making sure that your LEA data manager has put you in the role of LEA finance/grants manager in eSchool Plus, so because that is the role that would get access to the application along with that of head of school. So just making sure that you're in the role of LEA Finance Grants Manager. You may not be the head of school, but that you're also the head of school will get access to the application and the data managers.
Thanks, Stephanie. I see
Sure.
another question that's about, will this slideshow be shared out? Yes, we will share at least the slides, but hopefully the recording, although there's a little bit, that's a little bit more technically complicated. And we'll share them on OSSE's recovery webpage. I know that GoToWebinar usually sends the recording out later in the day after it's complete, and so it'll probably be at least next week sometime, probably Monday, to get all of that. We need to add captions to the recording in order to post it. Any additional questions? Okay, well, before we head out, I just wanted to, again, that osse.esser@dc.gov email address can be used to submit any questions that you have that you felt were maybe more specific to your LEA or just didn't want to ask on the webinar. And we will be back in touch when we have more information, hopefully early in the new year. Thank you so much.